I always loved spending weekends at my family's secluded cabin deep in the woods. It was my place of peace, far from the chaos of the city. The cabin was old but cozy, with a stone fireplace and large windows that let in the sunlight. I often went there alone to read, write, and enjoy the quiet. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled in with a good book. The silence was soothing, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the fire, feeling the warmth on my face. Around midnight, I heard a faint knock at the door. Confused and a bit startled, I put down my book and got up to check. No one should have been out here. I peered through the window but saw nothing. The forest was dark and still. I opened the door cautiously, but there was no one there, only the cold night air. I shrugged it off, thinking it might have been the wind or an animal. Returning to my book, I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. An hour later, just as I was getting sleepy, the knocking resumed, louder and more insistent. This time, I grabbed a flashlight and flung the door open. Still no one. My heart raced as I scanned the dark woods, shining the light on the trees and shadows. Suddenly, I heard a whisper behind me. "Let me in." I spun around, but the cabin was empty. The whisper grew louder, echoing off the walls. It sounded like it was coming from inside the house. Terrified, I backed away from the door and shut it quickly, locking it tight. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination. I sat back down by the fire, but I couldn't focus on my book anymore. The whispering continued, getting closer and more urgent. "Let me in," it repeated over and over. My mind raced with fear. Who could be out here? How did they get inside? I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. I was completely alone. The whispering stopped suddenly, replaced by a loud bang on the window. I jumped up, shining my flashlight toward the sound. There, pressed against the glass, was a pale, ghostly face staring back at me with hollow eyes. "Let me in," it mouthed silently. I screamed and backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. The face disappeared, but I could still feel its presence. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. Grabbing my car keys, I ran out of the cabin, not even bothering to pack my things. As I drove away, I glanced back at the cabin. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figure standing in the doorway, watching me leave. The whispers followed me, fading into the distance as I sped down the dirt road, vowing never to return to that haunted place. When I finally reached the safety of my home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. The peace I once found in the cabin was shattered, replaced by a lingering fear that would never leave me. I had inherited an old cabin from my grandparents. It was a quaint place, nestled deep in the woods, far from the nearest town. The cabin had a rustic charm, with wooden beams and a stone fireplace, but it also had an eerie, ancient attic that I had never explored. One autumn weekend, my friends convinced me to spend a few nights there. We arrived on a chilly Friday evening, excited for a fun, relaxing getaway. We spent the first night playing board games, roasting marshmallows, and telling stories by the fire. As midnight approached, we decided to call it a night. Just as we were about to go to bed, we heard faint footsteps above us in the attic. We exchanged puzzled looks but shrugged it off, assuming it was just animals moving around. The next night, the noises became more pronounced. We heard the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor and what sounded like whispers. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate. Gathering our courage, we climbed the creaky stairs to the attic. The door was old and heavy, and it took some effort to push it open. Inside, the attic was filled with old furniture, dusty memorabilia, and cobwebs. The air was cold, and a musty smell lingered. We shone our flashlights around, revealing an assortment of old trunks, a broken rocking chair, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. Suddenly, we saw a shadow dart behind an old wardrobe. My heart pounded as we approached cautiously, but when we looked behind the wardrobe, there was nothing there. The temperature seemed to drop even more, and we could see our breath fogging up. The air felt heavy, and an uneasy feeling settled over us. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut, trapping us inside. We jumped, our flashlights shaking in our hands. The shadows in the attic seemed to come alive, swirling around us. We heard whispers again, this time clearer. "Get out," they said. The voice was cold and menacing. We huddled together, too scared to move. Desperation took over, and we tried to force the door open. It wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the shadows grew closer, their whispers turning into angry shouts. "Get out!" they repeated, louder and more forceful. With a burst of adrenaline, we finally managed to break the door open. We stumbled down the stairs, tripping over each other in our rush to escape. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for breath in the cold night air. We grabbed our things and piled into the car, not bothering to lock up the cabin. As we drove away, I glanced back and saw the attic window. A pale, ghostly figure stood there, watching us leave. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. We never returned to the cabin after that. The memories of that weekend haunted us for years, and we rarely spoke about it. The old cabin, once a place of fond memories, became a dark, terrifying chapter in our lives. I had rented a cabin in the mountains to work on my novel. It was perfect, isolated, quiet, and with breathtaking views of the surrounding forest. The cabin had a cozy interior with wooden walls, a stone fireplace, and a big window that let in lots of light. I thought it would be the perfect place to find inspiration. The first few days were productive. I woke up early, wrote for hours, and took long walks in the woods to clear my mind. The fresh air and solitude were exactly what I needed. At night, I enjoyed the peace and quiet, reading by the fire before going to bed. But on the fourth night, I started hearing music. It was a soft, haunting melody that sounded like it was being played on a piano. I thought it was strange because there was no piano in the cabin. I walked around, trying to find the source of the music, but it seemed to be coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The next night, the music returned, louder and clearer. It played the same sad, eerie tune over and over. I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened. I checked the entire cabin again, looking for a radio or a music box, but found nothing. The music seemed to follow me wherever I went. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to stay up late and listen closely. The music seemed to be coming from below the cabin. I had never noticed a basement door before, but as I searched, I found a small, hidden door in the floor, covered by a rug. I hesitated but then opened the door, revealing a steep set of stairs leading down into darkness. With my heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and descended into the basement. The air was cold and musty, and my flashlight beam revealed old, dusty furniture and cobwebs. In the corner of the basement, I saw an old piano covered in dust. I approached it slowly, the haunting melody growing louder with each step. As I stood in front of the piano, I could see the keys moving on their own, playing the eerie tune. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, frozen in place. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around and found myself face to face with a ghostly figure of a woman. Her eyes were hollow, and her face was pale and sad. She stared at me, her lips moving silently as if she were trying to speak. She whispered, "Play with me." Her voice was soft but filled with sorrow. I stumbled back, tripping over an old chair and falling to the ground. The woman moved closer, her hand reaching out to me. Panicking, I scrambled to my feet and ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. The music stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its place. I could still feel the chill of her touch on my shoulder. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my things and fled the cabin, not bothering to look back. As I drove away, I could still hear the haunting melody faintly in my ears. The peace I had once found in the cabin was shattered, replaced by a lingering fear that I would never forget. When I got back home, I tried to put the experience behind me, but the memory of the ghostly woman and her haunting music stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, waiting for someone to play with her once more. My partner and I decided to take a romantic getaway to a cabin deep in the woods. We wanted to escape the busy city life and enjoy some peace and quiet. The cabin was charming, with a big fireplace, cozy furniture, and a porch that overlooked the forest. It felt like the perfect spot to relax and reconnect. The first night was perfect. We cooked a delicious dinner, drank some wine, and sat by the fire, talking and laughing. The sound of the crackling fire and the distant hoot of an owl made the evening feel magical. We went to bed feeling happy and content. But the second night, things took a strange turn. We were woken up in the middle of the night by whispers echoing through the cabin. At first, we thought it was the wind or the creaking of the old wooden walls, but the whispers sounded like voices, faint and distant. "Did you hear that?" my partner asked, sitting up in bed. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. The whispers seemed to come from all around us, growing louder and more distinct. They were calling our names. We got out of bed and walked through the cabin, trying to find the source of the whispers. We checked every room, but found nothing. The whispers followed us, getting louder and more urgent. It felt like someone was right behind us, whispering in our ears. We decided to ignore it and go back to bed, hoping it would stop. But the whispers continued, making it impossible to sleep. I felt a growing sense of dread. Something was not right. The next morning, while cleaning up, we found an old journal hidden under the floorboards in the living room. It was dusty and worn, the pages yellowed with age. Curious, we opened it and started reading. The journal belonged to a previous occupant of the cabin. It was filled with entries describing similar experiences, whispers in the night, strange shadows, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The final entry sent chills down my spine. It read, "They come at night. They want us to join them. I don't think I'll make it out." We looked at each other, fear evident in our eyes. The journal confirmed that we were not imagining things. We decided to leave the cabin that evening, but wanted to spend the day exploring the woods nearby, trying to distract ourselves from the eerie events of the night. As we hiked through the forest, we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made us jump. We cut our hike short and returned to the cabin, determined to pack up and leave before dark. As the sun began to set, the whispers started again. This time, they were louder and more insistent. "Join us," they repeated over and over. We hurriedly packed our bags, our hands shaking with fear. Just as we were about to leave, the front door slammed shut on its own. The cabin grew colder, and the whispers turned into angry shouts. "Join us!" they demanded. The shadows on the walls seemed to come alive, swirling around us. We fought our way to the door, managing to pull it open and rush outside. As we ran to the car, I glanced back at the cabin. In the window, I saw several ghostly figures staring at us, their eyes hollow and sad. They watched us drive away, their whispers fading into the distance. The drive back to the city was silent. Neither of us spoke, too shaken by what we had experienced. The peace we had hoped to find in the cabin was replaced by a lingering fear that we could not escape. Even in the safety of our home, the memories of those whispers and ghostly figures haunted us. We never spoke of the cabin again. The journal we found remained hidden in a box, a reminder of the terrifying weekend we spent in the woods. I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits in the cabin were still waiting, calling out for someone else to join them.